Like all famous people, everybody needs guidance in their careers. And Vintage Crop was no different. And in that, he had legendary Irish racehorse trainer Dermot Weld. Dermot, welcome to Vintage Crop's birthday. We know he was a good horse, Dermot. We saw that in the form. When did you know he was special?
I think from the very beginning. He showed talent in his very early days, and he just got better as the years went on.
And those great early days, he jumped hurdles, he won many great races. What one race stands out in your mind as his greatest European feat?
I think the English Cesar, which he won it by 10 lengths with top weight. And you see, he had this wonderful ability in that he was an out-and-out stayer with speed, and he just had so many gears that he just ran away from them. I think there were 28 or 34 horses ran that year in the English Cesar, and he just left them for dead. He just sprinted away from them at the end of 2 miles, 2 furlongs.
There's a marvellous story about the whole getting to Melbourne. It's just absolutely incredible. And you had to jump through hoops to get this horse there because it was the first time ever. Just relive those problems and everything that got the horse there.
Well, it's a long story, but he is the first international racehorse because it was impossible to go to Australia. People forget in 1993, up to then, you couldn't bring horses to race in Melbourne, or in Australia I should say, with quarantine rules. So the year before I entered him in the Melbourne Cup, I believe he would have won the race the year before, but it wasn't possible to bring the horse there because quarantine rules, you would have to quarantine in the quarantine centre in Sydney. And you couldn't exercise. So it wasn't practical, it wasn't possible. It was like if a human went to Australia and they had to be cooped up for a couple of weeks, they couldn't take part. So we had to convince the Department of Agriculture in Canberra, in help from the Department of Agriculture in Ireland, and after a year we got the rules changed, and the flight path of airplanes had to be changed. Everything had to be changed to enable the horse to quarantine on a racetrack where there was no racing, so he's well away from all other horses. So he was the first horse to experience the new quarantine rules, and that was the start of international horse racing in Australia, and he was the first horse.
That's absolutely incredible. And then there's one little snag at the end of it all. Just you're about to go, I believe the fog landed in Ireland and nearly upset everything.
Yeah, it was amazing. As I said in my book, Vintage Crop Against All Odds, I tell it probably more accurately than I'm going to tell you now, but it was, we had everything arranged, everything was ready. The plane was coming in from England to pick him up because, you see, he's in quarantine. He was in quarantine in Ireland, he had to stay in quarantine, and he was flying on his own from Ireland across to England to Heathrow, and connecting with a Cathay Pacific flight that was going to bring him from Heathrow to Melbourne. And the plane coming in, unfortunately that evening we'd fog. We just didn't have fog, we'd heavy fog, and it wasn't scheduled. But to cut a long story short, it looked pretty certain that the plane wasn't going to be able to get in. And if it couldn't get in time, we weren't going to connect with the flight to Australia. And the problem was, you could say, well, you can do it the following day or the following week. That wasn't on, because we had a very tight frame, because we still had to do, remember, our quarantine in Australia, and we had 2 weeks to do it in. So time was running out, and we had to make that flight. And with the fog that was coming down, I was pretty sure at one stage that we weren't going to make it. And I actually was resigned to it. I walked across the path from my house to my yard. I just said, well, listen, everybody was saying this whole idea was mad anyway, and maybe they are right. Maybe this is a ridiculous decision. Just think of all the stress on the horse, on David Phillips who's travelling with him, on myself. We don't need all this stress. Let's just stay racing the horse in Ireland. Maybe people are right. It can't be done. It was never done before, and maybe never will be done. And literally, as I got to where his stable was, I got another phone call. The early days of cell phones or mobile phones, and it was to say the fog was clearing and the plane was able to land, and to get him up as quick as possible. Brilliant.
Now, dealing with Melbourne itself, you're down there, the horse is there for 2 weeks. What's the whole experience like? It's first time, you must have been stressed out of your brains getting through all this. Just relive those days and nights before it, and of course the emotion of the win itself. The race, the nation stopped for Melbourne, so you were in the middle of that, Dermot. Tell us about it.
Yeah, well, the Melbourne Cup, I always describe it as an extravaganza. Mark Twain is the man that used those words, and I think it was 1897. But it's an amazing horse race, and the build-up is fantastic. And as this was the first horse to come from Europe to run in the race, it was extra important to them. And everything went according to plan, but the ground was pretty firm, and we really needed a little bit of rain. And when I woke up at about 5:30 on the morning of the race, I was woken by the sound of rain on the window panes of the hotel I was in, and it was the best sound I think I've ever heard.
The first time you ever wanted rain, Dermot.
Definitely. And what it did, it just eased the ground. It just took the sting out of the ground and just left it safe. And the rest is history.
Absolutely marvellous training with feet. And the first thing it struck me today when I came into the National Stud is I saw a vintage crop, and he looks absolutely magnificent. 26. It's just a credit to the National Stud to have a horse in that order at this time of his life.
Well, firstly, Vintage Crop is an amazing individual, both mentally and physically. He's probably the toughest horse mentally I ever trained, and physically he's a wonderful equine athlete. But he's a great credit to the National Stud, and people should go and look at him. He's 26 years of age, and he is in the full of health. He is wonderfully taken care of here. Fiona does a fabulous job with him. And in a time when there's a lot of negativity about old horses and old animals, it's wonderful to see a 26-year-old racehorse in the full of his prime being maintained the way he's been maintained.
Well, Dermot, this training feat has been described as one of the greatest training feats in horse racing history, and I certainly want to thank you for leading it to here today.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay.